Now, I would like to call upon Shashank to guide us about nonprofits.
Thank you, Ayman. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shashank Subhash, along with my teammate Elias Missa. We are working on identifying indicators of nonprofit organization health. Well, as the name suggests, what are nonprofit organizations? They are built to serve people rather than making profit. Across US, there are around 1.8 million such organizations which make annually around $3 trillion revenue. Well, this is just an economical part of it. The more impact they play comes beyond the economical part. Their main aim is to address the unmet societal needs and uplift the communities which have been overlooked. There are some technical issues. The nonprofit center. Nonprofit center plays a major role in supporting over 250 local nonprofit organizations across Northeast Florida. Their main aim is to connect, advocate, and strengthen nonprofit organizations by providing them suitable services and also tools by making them enabling access to certain peer groups among those organizations. This makes the nonprofit organization to use their service and increase their capability and better serve their communities. Well, as you know, what is nonprofit organization as of now? When this organization perform well, they help the society in every manner, rather from schooling, housing, till healthcare, which leads a good foundation for a strong and good society. But when this organization began to struggle, there is a lot of variation. Well, you may not notice immediately their effect in finance or their drop on service, but there is an immediate effect on human life and the standard of living. This is where our wicked problem comes up. We want to analyze the early sign indicators of the struggling organizations so that the appropriate action can be taken on time so that a delivery of service is not compromised. Okay. To do this problem, we turned on to one of the most consistent and comprehensive data source, which is IRS. IRS provides 990 full form to nonprofit organization who makes revenue over $200,000. This form has 12 parts, which is combination of both non-finance and finance sections. But unfortunately, we have only access to 6 of those parts, which is highlighted here in green color. As I said earlier, our data source come from IRS, but IRS has a vast data. It has non-profit organization data across US. Working with the nonprofit center, we focused only on 7 counties, which are in Northeast Florida. And our final data set, after filtering this huge data set to only Northeast Florida counties, has 1,200 unique organizations. Well, there is no surprise in it. Majority of them are from dual. Since we have taken data of 5 years from 2019 till 2023, we summed up records to 5,000. We have more than 5,000 records and 300 features. That is the surprising part. 300 features, which gives you an in-detail explanation of each of those organizations. Our process involves 5 key steps. where first we prepare the data, and then we split the data to finance and non-finance section, and then we analyze and select the relevant features from each of those sections. And finally, we ran clustering using those combined features, which helped us to derive patterns across those organizations which share some common characteristics. Well, you have the data, you have the problem, everything else. The typical way to approach this problem is just analyze the non-financial data, just see revenue, just see the expense, come up with a solution. This is what most of the common people do, and this is a typical basic approach. But we wanted to approach it in a different way. So we picked up those ignored, overlooked, non-financial variables first, and then we found out a governance patterns among those organizations just by using non-finance variables, which meant a lot. And then we added our finance variables to those non-finance variables, which helped us to get a more insights regarding those organizations. This process was not easy. We have to deal with a lot of skewed data, imbalanced data set, and a lot more. I can give a lot of examples, but we are running out of time. Okay. As I said, we just have only 6 parts, what we have access to. Out of those 6 parts, 3 of the parts were non-finance variables. Those 3 non-finance section have 100 plus non-finance variables. We can't keep all of them to our clustering models. If we can give it to our model, all those 100 variables, it will overfit. That does not make sense. So what we did is we grouped those 100 variables based on their similarity and filtered those groups based on their low support variance. And then we applied some correlation techniques and some feature engineering. And finally, we narrowed it down to 9 variables which are very relevant so that organization can be distinguishable easily using our model. When I say this 9 key variables, it has, just to give an overview, whether an organization does an audit or not, the number of employees they have, the number of contractors who are getting paid more than 100K, and so on. So these 9 variables will be carry forwarded and will be combined with our finance part as well. Now I'm going to invite Elias to take up the finance part, and also he has some amazing dashboards to showcase.
Thank you. So let's get into the financial data and some of the challenges we faced. The first main challenge was missing values. Now, even though we had over 100 financial columns, only 10 columns had at least 90% of their data. This is likely due to organizations filing their general revenue and expenses and then ignoring the specified fields. The second big challenge we faced was heavy skew in the data. Now, due to high variation in nonprofit finances, there was lots of skew in our features, and we solved this by turning the continuous features into discrete ranges that still captured the overall variance. Now, these discrete features were used for our K-modes clustering, but first, let's talk about the final financial engineered features that we came up with. Now, I won't go over all of these, I'll just go over a couple. Let's start with liquid unrestricted net assets, or commonly called LUNA. Now, this measures the liquid assets that an organization has, and it's commonly used as an indicator of short-term financial health and resilience. Additionally, revenue volatility measures how stable an organization's revenue is year to year. So, let's go into what is clustering. Well, clustering is an unsupervised machine learning technique that groups data points into subsets, commonly called clusters, where points within a cluster are more similar to each other than points outside of that cluster. Why did we choose it? Well, our data has no labels, so we use something unsupervised like clustering, which allows us to group our data points into clusters and profile them to gain some insights. So, we took our financial features, we took our non-financial features, and we fed it into the K-modes clustering algorithm, and here are our results. First cluster, conventional and stable. They had high cash reserves, decently stable revenue, and are organizations of normal size. Second, preserving and relentless. Now this cluster had declining asset growth, volatile revenue, and had very low liquid assets. Now we have growth-oriented. Organizations in this cluster had high net asset growth with a strong presence of cash. Finally, we have our compliant operators. Now, these organizations are the big players. Lots of revenue and expenses. They're large organizations, many of them filing for an audit or with contractors above 100K. But organizations in this cluster actually did have very negative liquid assets. So now we'll go into a Tableau dashboard to visualize some of these clusters. So here, let's just pay attention to the bar graph, which is simply an account of the organizations in each cluster. It's quite uniform. However, let's look at the organizations that filed for an audit only. Look at that difference. We have the compliant operators with a domination over filing an audit, while also the growth-oriented and conventional and stable clusters in the middle, while our preserving and relentless clusters all the way at the bottom. So let's undo that filter. And now let's look at our second graph, which is revenue and expenses. So as we can see, those compliant operators are way up top. They're big spenders, they have lots of revenue, lots of expenses. However, if we look towards the bottom, we have the preserving and relentless and the conventional and stable clusters are around the same in terms of revenue and expenses. However, if you see, since the preserving and relentless circle is blue, it is actually the only cluster that had more expenses than revenue. But these two clusters were similar in expenses and revenue and size, so we're going to go to the next dashboard to visualize between them. So we have a scatter plot here, and let's check only the preserving and stable clusters. Okay, so this scatter plot shows on the x-axis revenue volatility, and on the y-axis their days of cash on hand. So as we can see, the revenue volatility is pretty close. However, there is some more skew on our preserving and relentless cluster, so they have slightly more unstable revenue. However, the biggest difference here is the cash. Look at the purple dots, which is our stable cluster. They have a lot more cash, and it's a big separation there. So now let's check all clusters again, and let's look at this nice line graph, which is just showing liquid assets and year. Well, as we can see, there's something interesting here from 2020 to 2021. That's a little something I'm sure most of you know called COVID. So as we can see, though, there's a big bounce back from 2021 in liquid assets. So there was that growth after. However, if we check just the preserving and relentless cluster, here's their line graph. It is the only cluster that actually has declining liquid assets from 2022 to 2023. So if we go and just check through a couple of the others, we'll see that after that COVID, they're still growing and growing, while our preserving and relentless cluster declined from 2022 to 2023. So these are some insights, and now let's go back to the presentation. All right, so let's talk about some key findings and actionable items. First key finding, the preserving and relentless cluster is of highest priority and requires some attention. Secondly, IRS Form 990 filing practices need to be improved. As I mentioned earlier, many organizations are filing just a few of their general fields while ignoring the rest. Third, Luna, cash on hand, and revenue volatility are playing crucial roles in identifying the health of a nonprofit organization. Now, let's go over some actionable items. So, we want to rely on the growth-oriented and compliance operators, which we profiled to be healthier clusters, so we can get some organizations from these clusters to help some of the ones that are in need. Secondly, the nonprofit center can start trying to gather a number of employees and volunteer info. So currently, in the 990 form, they only have to put down full-time employees, no part-time employees, and no volunteers. This resulted in our employee column, over 80% of the rows had 0 for the employees. So if Nonprofit Center could gather that data, that would be help improve some insights. So finally, some nonprofits should consider auditing their finances, and this is something Nonprofit Center can maybe help with by encouraging these organizations to audit their finances. So Nonprofit Center and thousands of nonprofit organizations are working together to make an impact on our community. With these insights, we can focus on organizations and help them where they need it most. The nonprofit sector and our society and community, if we work together, it can continue to grow and thrive. Thank you.